Thank you. Good morning, everybody who's listening and on this virtual meeting. I'm Councillor Dave Stewart from the Isle of Wight, and I'm the chair of the Hampshire Police and Crime Panel. And this is our meeting of the 29th of January. Before the meeting starts, I just want to remind all members that we are quorum, which is good. If you could all unmute your microphones when you wish to speak. Otherwise, if you could leave them on mute. But we are quite happy seeing your faces. And Caroline is monitoring everybody on the call. Remind members that there is a chat line function where you can put comments and they will be picked up. They're also recorded, so be aware of that. We'll use the raise a hand function if we can to speak, but if not, you can physically raise your hand and we will see that. Finally, if we have any deputies, which I don't think we do today, they'll join us 5 minutes before. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Caroline, for what's going to be a concentrated effort. So thank you all for attending the virtual meeting of the Hampshire Police and Crime Panel. This meeting is being webcast on YouTube and hosted on the Hampshire Constabulary Council's website. All decisions at today's meeting will be reached through a vote. I will call for the vote at the appropriate time under each item, with the vote and its outcome read audibly. I will begin by reading the names of the members of the committee so that they can confirm their attendance today for the public record. Members, please unmute and confirm your attendance when your name is called so that we can ensure you can be heard. I begin by noting that I have apologies from Councillor Tonya Craig from Eastleigh Borough Council. So, Councillor Jan Warwick.
Good morning.
Thank you. Councillor Diane Andrews from the New Forest.
Morning, Chair.
Councillor Narinda Baines from Havant.
Good morning, Chairman.
Councillor John Beavis, MBE from Gosport.
Yes, good morning, Chairman.
Councillor Simon Bound, Basingstoke and Dean.
Good morning, everybody.
Councillor Trevor Cartwright, MBE from Fareham.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Councillor Lisa Griffiths from Winchester.
Good morning, yes, present.
Councillor Lee Hunt from Portsmouth.
Good morning, everybody.
Councillor Dave McKinney from East Hampshire. Not sure if David is here at the moment. I'll go on. Councillor Ken Mersham from Rushmore.
Good morning.
I apologise, Ken. Mushcamp.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Councillor James Radley from Hart.
Good morning, everyone.
Councillor Dave Shields from Southampton.
Present, Chair. Good morning, everyone.
Councillor Tony Jones from, who's the local authority cooperative member, Tony.
Good morning.
Councillor Brian Lamming from Winchester Additional Local Authority member.
Good morning, everyone.
Councillor Lynn Stagg from Portsmouth Additional Local Authority member.
Good morning, everyone.
Mr. Michael Coombs, one of our 2 independent cooperative members.
Morning, everyone.
And Mr. Bob Perkis, independent cooperative member.
Good morning. Hi.
Thank you all for declaring interest. If you can now mute, that's good. As I say, apologies from Councillor Tanya Craig from Eastleigh. Item 2 on our agenda is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest which are not already recorded in their local authority references or already made aware to the panel? I take that as a no. Thank you very much. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. You can switch your microphones on for this just to get a collective confirmation. Are members happy that the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of October 2020 are a true and accurate record and can be agreed? If you can just say yes or no.
Yes.
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 Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Yes,
That's very
agreed.
helpful. If you can mute again. Item 4 is deputations. There have been no public questions or deputation requests received today, so we will move straight on to item 5. which is Chairman's announcements. I have 3 announcements. First of all, in November, I, along with the members of the panel and our supporting officer, joined the National Conference for Police and Crime Panels. Across this 3-day virtual event, we heard updates on matters of national interest, policy and governance, as well as learning from the best practice of some of our national counterparts. I was pleased to hear how well our panel and its work was regarded at a national level, and to be joined at the conference by Enzo Riglia, the Deputy PCC, and a colleague as our guest. The Chief Constable's presentation to the conference as keynote speaker was well received, and I'm pleased to welcome her to our meeting here today. Good morning, Olivia.
Good morning, and thank you for the welcome.
I would also like to thank the Commissioner and his team for arranging the informative briefing to members of the panel, where we heard an update on the violent crime reduction centres and the developments to the Interact system, as well as receiving a briefing on local policing from ACC Maggie Brythe. We look forward to the next briefing in February, which will focus on commissioning and engagement with community safety partnerships. Finally, it is important to note that the panel recognises that the high standards of performance and reputation of Hampshire Constabulary has been undermined by revelations of a toxic culture of racist, sexist and homophobic behaviour which had existed in a serious and organised crime unit in the north of the county, and which was recently subject to investigation and misconduct proceedings. As a result, I have asked our newly formed Equality and Diversity subgroup to work with the Commissioner and through him with the Constabulary to scrutinise the organisational response to this important matter, and in due course to report back their findings and conclusions to the panel. Our key question will be to understand how is the Commissioner planning to hold the Chief Constable to account for addressing this very disappointing exposure of unacceptable performance and supervision, so as to reassure the communities of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight that such conduct will not be tolerated now or in the future in Hampshire Constabulary. And I'm grateful to Councillor Dave Shields, who's on the call with us today, as he will lead that piece of work. Thank you. Item 6 is the Police and Crime Commissioner's announcements, and as I say, I welcome the Commissioner to the meeting today. I invite him to make any announcements he has for today's meeting before we move on then to the precept issue. Commissioner, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, and good morning, members of the panel. I'm glad to be here to talk about the budget, but you mentioned rightly in your remarks the unacceptable bad view and the resolution of that recently and the need to drill down into it. I want to be clear at this point because I think the community do want to know, and your deliberate study will be right, that more than 2 years ago, I challenged the Chief Constable to shine a light into every corner of her constabulary, even on the basis of an allegation. And it won't surprise anyone, I'm sure, and there'll be more information to find, that the Chief Constable was absolutely as proactive as were very many of our senior leadership in the immediate responses that we took, whilst preserving the right of fair process for all those against whom there were allegations and the now conclusions of that element of it. It is clear that there needs to be a significant focus on this, and the Chief Constable, with her own leadership and with the support of all colleagues, changed the areas of focus to dial up and to ensure that look at the ethics and the morale and morality and performance should stand. I remember personally hearing a presentation from an Assistant Chief Constable to new recruits, indicating and reinforcing in a way that from the moment of the attestation, their lives change. They are held to a higher account. Recently, the IOPC, you may want to know, and I believe this is relative, but complemented the internal approaches and leadership in these awful circumstances, rightly so. And for all the many whose ethos, whose professionalism and behaviours have been what is required of them, and required of anyone set over us with the powers of a constable, for all of those who perform to that absolute authority and appropriateness, the reassurance of that openness and visibility and determination to resolve the issue is something they need to have heard, as we absolutely condemn the unacceptable behaviour of a few. I believe you will hear, as you investigate this in your next meeting and appropriately drill down into it, that absolutely the constabulary main leadership, and I believe at every level in the constabulary, there is a determination to continue the effort to make sure this cannot and must not, of course, happen again. And a well-funded, I make the point as I move to what I had planned as opening remarks, a well-funded constabulary with the added capacity that this budget offers will help give us capacity for leadership and instruction and mentoring as we welcome so many new members to our organisation and reinforce those absolute values that we need to see. And that is the core business of the day for the first item after some introductions. Chairman, if I may, I'll continue into what I had hoped to say, some comments I'd hoped to say as Commissioner's comments. From day one, since I took this role, it's been a privilege and a responsibility to serve and represent our communities. This was not a year any of us would have wanted, and the challenges we faced and face are not over yet. And a year on, there is a need to recognise the losses we've suffered as a community, as well as within our organisation, suffered the challenges still ahead of us, and the need to protect, to reassure and create plans for a safer future at a time of evident risk. A year ago, when we first went into lockdown, there was a period of rare reduction in crime as criminals and those who wished us harm locked down too. Our front line was more visible to our communities, and there was time to hear from and engage with those we serve in a way that they have been seeking for some time. It reinforced public support for policing. It starkly reminded us of what was on people's minds, the good and the bad, and it began a journey showing new challenges, new risks and new fears within our communities and within our organisation as one of those communities that we all serve too. And it was clearly a time to change. We will not be going back to before. We will be going forward into a future. But we must, in that future, hold to core service deliveries and ethos, the point you made and I was making just a minute ago. Individually and as a panel, you have been on this journey too, and there has been a lot achieved since I last set a budget last year, with, after due questioning, scrutiny and examination, as I suspect I'll receive today, your full support. Over 5 years ago, when I arrived in 2016, I promised to each constituent to keep you and your family safer. That year, I created my plan and set a course in challenging funding conditions. In 2017, my engagement with commissioning partners and testing of the policing requirement to be operationally effective now and into the future had matured. And by 2018, we had progressed to investing in policing, having created opportunities through consistent lobbying for funds, opportunities to invest in the front line and supporting infrastructure. In 2019, we continued this progress with community support. And this year, we will have additional police officers, crime reduction and prevention to keep and sustain the original promise to keep you, your family and our communities safer. But it will require the proposed council tax increase to deliver. You will recall that a year ago, and first amongst my colleagues, I created a new plan at speed to recognise the suddenly changed global and local impact of resulting from COVID. This plan runs to 2022 and is a key baseline for the budget which I look forward to presenting shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate your comments there. Moving to item 7, can I just begin on behalf of the all members and staff of the Police and Crime Panel, through you, Commissioner, and through you, Chief Constable, to thank our Hampshire Constabulary officers and staff for the outstanding commitment and work they are doing to keep the two counties of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight safe and secure through this unprecedented pandemic, which is not yet over. And remind everyone who's listening and on this call that they have a duty to stay home, protect our NHS, and to save lives. For the meeting today, we have received the Police and Crime Commissioner's proposed precept for 21-22 and the supporting financial information. Under the Police and Crime Panel's regulations of 2012, we are now required as a panel to review the proposed precept, which is for this year, is recommended by the Commissioner at an increase of £15 per annum for Band D properties. We're pleased again to welcome the Chief Constable, Olivia Pinckney, to our meeting today, along with the Commissioner, to present his proposed precept. At the end of the discussion, I will invite members to vote on whether or not they support the Commissioner's proposed precept, or whether they wish to veto the proposal, which would need to be supported by a 2/3 majority. We will then be required to formally report our decision to the Commissioner, which may include any recommendations and, if necessary, confirmation of the veto decision. The Police and Crime Commissioner is required to have regard to the panel's report, including any recommendations, and provide a response to the panel and publish his response by the 15th of February. Unless a veto decision has been reached, the Commissioner will then issue his precept for 21-22. We will now hear representations from the Commissioner and his team, along with the Chief Constable, following which I will invite the Chair of the Finance Working Group to provide an overview of the scrutiny undertaken on the lead up to the precept review. So I'll now turn to the Chief Constable and the Commissioner for their presentations, although I'm not sure what format that's in. So
It'll be me to start, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I'll hand over to you and the Chief Constable. Thank you.
Okay. So first from me, and then the Chief Constable, and then a closer from me before your questions. This budget is not only fit for dealing with the here and now, but also enables us to prepare for the challenges ahead. I'm conscious that I have continued in this job due to COVID when the elections were postponed last year, and I responded and created the new plan, as I've mentioned just previously, at speed that recognises the suddenly emerged global and local impact and creates a solid foundation for my successor in the development of a new police and crime plan that takes into account this changing landscape we all inhabit, identifying need and responding to new challenges in our communities. The support I seek from you today is reflected in your opening remarks, Chairman. Thank you. The support I seek is straightforward. It is to support a £15 a year or 29p per week council tax precept increase for the average Band D. With significant support I've received from the local residents and the compelling operational case that the Chief Constable has made, I firmly believe that the increase of the policing precept will keep local residents and our communities safer and is the only option. But this straightforward statement and request for your support is underpinned by a wealth of detailed arguments, tested by detailed examination over its hundreds of hours and hundreds of lines of spreadsheets and detailed analysis, and a strong challenge, I believe the Chief Constable might acknowledge, to make her operational case to me, which is her responsibility independently of any Police and Crime Commissioner, but importantly in her voice and in her commitment to deliver. At the government settlement decision at the end of the year, last year, it became clear that the £15 had been set as the maximum increase, and the government had factored the taking of that maximum increase into its settlement figures for what policing received nationally. I am very conscious of the significant impact the pandemic has had on our stretched economy, which affects all of our communities and very many individuals and their prospects for some time ahead, which is why in setting scenarios to consider in October last year for council tax funding, and subsequently if funding were to started with the first test, and that was what could be done with no rise in council tax funding. And that was the start point to understand that. And subsequently, if funding were to step up by 1% to test what added value each level and specifically what would be delivered to reduce crime and keep our communities safer, and what would be the risks if such funding were not provided. It was at that point a wide range of scenarios, starting from £0 and rising to £15. But following these scenario planning exercises and listening to the Chief Constable request for £15, I only have one recommendation to make, and that's the one I've already outlined. And the Chief Constable has submitted a formal statement of her case, for which I'm grateful, and it's an essential part of enabling my recommendation. As you would expect, I've not only spoken with the Chief Constable and the team, but with those who represent the staff organisations, and they too have given unanimous support for this proposal. In making her case to me for increased funding, the Chief Constable was clear that additional investment is required through the proposed precept increase to ensure that there are more frontline police officers and staff to provide a visible presence, prevent crime and investigate incidents when they occur, and sustain PCSO numbers, which I know is high on lots of people's priorities. To ensure effective routes for the public to contact policing in both emergency and non-emergency situations, and for policing to be able to ensure that contact from the public is directed to the most effective and appropriate service or partner to support their inquiry. And to enable the constabulary to invest in the technology, equipment and wellbeing initiatives that make those officers and staff more effective and present on the front line. To ensure the uplift in police officer numbers is delivered and supported by the right estate provision, and this includes initiatives in Bitton Police Station, Netley, and the investment in the Isle of Wight estate. To allow for an expansion of the Safer Streets initiative to Basingstoke and Portsmouth, building on the work already undertaken in Southampton, and to further invest into resources to prevent and tackle rural crime, including funding of a geotagging scheme for quad bikes, high-value farm vehicles and machinery, and additional 4x4 vehicles in support of rural policing, as well as other initiatives. Chairman, you kindly sent on behalf of a member of the panel a question that you asked that I made the Chief Constable aware of, and I have done that, but it is a question that is for me to give the first answer to. And the question was, in normal times, the questioner would support a maximum increase. However, many households are facing financial difficulties in uncertain times and having to defer spending plans. How do you respond to the challenge of why, as the constabulary already is highly rated by the Inspectorate for its performance and value for money, you have not chosen to moderate or defer some of your plans and thereby support a lower increase in the precept, which may help maintain the support from the public upon which effective policing relies? It's a fair question, and I dare say that's represented in some of those who voted against it in the surveys, and maybe on the minds of some of those who, on balance, chose to support the increase. But the core answer to this is that we continue to be underfunded as a constabulary through the fairer funding formula not being fair to us. It is a significant loss every year of more than £40 million. It is on government's mind to improve it, but it won't happen soon. And it's the first reason why, however well they perform and however deservedly the constabulary receive their goods and recognition of what they're doing, the opportunity to do more is under significant pressure. And the questioner raises the issue of the Inspectorate saying that we're good, so and goes on to ask his appropriate question. And what I make the point is, in those same reports, the Inspectorate themselves, as well as the Chief Constable and her team knowing very well, and my being clear from my examination and challenge to the constabulary and seeing it on the front line myself when we were more out and about before COVID, that the increased pressures of changes in how criminals behave, the increased pressure of demand, and the progress towards the improvements that the uplift will give are things that will limit the degree of high harm and threat that the Chief Constable will be able to do. And so that inspectorate comment needs to be in the context of the inspectorate themselves, understand the pressure and the increased risk to the constabulary's performance that their excellent efforts are mitigating at the moment. And also, it's very clear to me that our public are seeking more. And so whilst I do respect the question, and I know others will share the questioner's view, the significant majority of those who answered the surveys declared that they understood the argument that we were making and were willing for this scale of investment to help us. And as PCC, I just make the declaration that I've tested these issues strongly. I started with what the risks were and what the pressures would be from zero. I looked at what would sustain what we currently do as an option that remained in my mind, and I found myself compelled to go forward, as we'll hear shortly. I'm now delighted that the Chief Constable is here with us today, and notwithstanding the formal submission to the panel, which is in the paperwork, I know how much you value as a panel hearing from her directly, and I'll now hand over to her to give you the operational perspective on the impact that this decision will have. Thank you, Chairman.
Commissioner, Chairman, members, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Before I move to the specific, can I refer very briefly, if I may, Chairman, back to the offer from Councillor David Shields, which I really welcome. The behaviour of a very small few in Basingstoke is completely at odds with this constabulary and the behaviour within this constabulary, and members will remember that in fact the behaviour was brought to light by a colleague who put their hand up and entrusted their management to deal with it, which we absolutely did swiftly. And wider community should be reassured actually that when things happen, this constabulary is decisive and takes action. And indeed, as the Commissioner kindly referenced, I had some very senior feedback, which was that the character of any organisation is demonstrated at its darkest times. This has been nearly 3 years ago now, of course, but one of our darkest times, and we have been commended on our character, both in addressing it, but also being transparent, learning, developing, and there's so much that we are doing on that front, and I welcome the work with Councillor Shields. But if I move to the point in hand, today is a really important day. It's a day that holds, I think, an opportunity that I've not had here as Chief Constable, serving Hampshire and our cities and the island for nearly 5 years. And it is a day which I hope, with your support, we can begin, like never before, to take the fight to the criminals. And you'll have seen that in my submission to your papers. Because as I sit here today, I know that there are criminals making people's lives a misery, and I would like to do more than we are currently able to do. Hampshire Constabulary is already a good organisation, very much behind the question that the Commissioner has just answered. We've heard it's not just my judgment, it's very much the judgment of our independent inspectorate, and it's underlined by the fact that the officers and staff I have the privilege to lead are best in class when it comes to their productivity. So each and every person is going above and punching above their weight in terms of what they're able to deliver for our communities. But the sad reality is that there aren't enough of them. And in a world, as the Commissioner has said, where criminals are becoming ever more cunning and embracing new technologies, that has to be a problem for all of us. And it's certainly a problem that is my professional one and I take very, very seriously. And as I said in my operational statement within your papers, it is my professional view that supporting anything other than that £15 bandy increase flies in the face of operational evidence. And I also believe we would be in conflict with very strong public support, which again are in the papers, for that maximum increase. And for me, it would be a question of having to explain to our communities why we chose, in the face of a growth of serious violence and uncertainty, not to do everything possible now to make them safer. But the point about justifying it is absolutely well made, so I'll turn to that. I wouldn't dream of trying to justify to you or to the public any more than I could justify it to my own officers and staff who for, as Chairman you kindly said, for almost a year now, have not just been doing their usual job of keeping the public safe, but they have been doing it at a time when others are safer at home. And there is a very harsh economic reality at the moment. We must all be respectful of that. Within my own organisation, partners, friends, families of serving officers and staff are amongst those who are facing all those issues of redundancy and furlough and uncertainty economically. We will have within our own organisation a public sector pay freeze, which will hit those frontline workers, including, of course, all the officers and staff. And public opinion must be listened to. And I'm hugely grateful to the Commissioner for his consultation work in this respect. And having the kind of scrutiny that we'll have today is an important part of all of that process to ensure that every pound of public money is spent wisely. So there is absolutely an economic reality. I absolutely acknowledge that, but there is also an operational reality. Last night, I was out in the rain in Portsmouth on COVID compliance patrol, so going to COVID calls, and it is a sobering experience. It's one that not many people will see. And I was out with my officers and my staff who are doing their best. And despite everything they've all got going on at home, whether that's elderly parents, homeschooling, all those things that we all know are within our normal life right now, they also know of colleagues who have been spat at, that's been in the national media this week, and threatened with being infected. We also know where home isn't the safe place it should be, and it was a concern right from the start, as the Commissioner said, in altering his police and crime plan back in March, and obviously I also altered our operational strategy too. As an example, we had a 50% increase in children at risk being referred to us as a result of that first lockdown. So when the kids went back to school in September, our children at risk went up 50%, where suddenly there were professional eyes on those young people. Our child abuse internet team, who have the very difficult and horrible job of reviewing instances of internet child abuse, frankly, that you wouldn't believe possible, they've also had a 50% increase in volume of what they are working through. And we know that for more people at home, unfortunately, means there's opportunity for online abuse, whether that's elder abuse and fraud. We know that. We know that abuse in the home, domestic abuse, is generally up. We've seen that play out in the national media as well as locally. And each of those investigations is painstaking, but of course it must be done well, because there's a frightened adult or child on the end of each and every one. And again, we've seen nationally, it is absolutely reflected locally, that the court system has huge backlogs. But those are not just court cases. They are victims waiting longer for their justice, criminals not being held to account as soon as you or I would like them to be. So there are real people on the end of each and every one. And within that, we have new disclosure legislation too that requires even more forensic combing of evidence like we've never seen before, much of which, of course, is digital with ever expanding memory space. So the time, the complexity of doing that requires more policing effort. So today, I would urge you, there is a chance to do something about those things, to take the fight to the people who are behind it all, because the difference to our communities will be felt and it will be tangible. I know you will have read my operational statement. I'm grateful to you for doing so. But if I can just draw out some of those tangible elements within the plan, those hundreds of lines of spreadsheet that the Commissioner refers to. And absolutely, as the Commissioner has said, do have support of both the Police Federation, of course, but also Unison and the Superintendents Association to boot. So I'll just walk through some of those, if I may, Chairman. The additional 146 new additional police officers in 21-22. They are all new, not merely replacing those who very naturally move on from us. In addition to that, there are 7 going to the Regional Organised Crime Unit, which takes our total of the new officers up to 153 for next year. And in addition to that, this budget enables us to bring forward a further 50 who will come a year early. The sooner they're in, the sooner they're out policing our communities and keeping communities safer. And this budget, if granted, means that we will be able to properly train them, equip them, means we'll be able to get those additional officers in quickly, as I've said, and we have done that very successfully this year. And to just reassure you, our uplift plans, our officer uplift plans are going really, really well. So when I was with you this time last year, I said then I was excited about welcoming 91 new recruits to the Hampshire family. and in April of this year, those are out from their training, and that's done. In May, another 62 will leave training. In June, a further 65 will leave training. In August, another 60 will leave training, and then joined by another 64. So we will have had 401 new additional officers. New officers, sorry. These are real people. I was out with some of them last night on their second operational shift. These are real officers making a real difference to our communities, and I don't want to put brakes on that at all. But in addition to those new officers, if granted, this budget means we can retain all of our PCSO numbers. Not all police forces are doing that, it is worth saying. And it stops us having to rob Peter to pay Paul in that regard, if you like. But I also want to keep them at work. I want to keep those officers and staff well. I want to keep their productivity up. And what that means is that investment, continued and enhancing the investment in their health and well-being is really important. We've done that in recent years, funded by the Commissioner. We have a far, far lower sickness and absence rates than most other forces. And to give you a sense of scale, our wellbeing programme thus far has cut sickness by 6,000 officer days. That's the equivalent of 30 extra officers. That is a significant amount of time where people are at work, delivering well and being productive. And at a time, of course, when health has never been more in the spotlight, this budget is essential and enables us to do more operational policing. It also gives me the opportunity, a greater capability to arrest an extra 300 of the most dangerous and organised criminals who are running county lines, drug lines into all of our towns and cities and villages. It is a real problem, and this will help us do even more on that. And it means, therefore, we can do even more to tackle drug-related crime. We have a team currently called Monument. You may well have heard of them. They take the fight to the criminals. They arrest key individuals. They take thousands of pounds of Class A drugs and knives and other weapons off the streets, and they help vulnerable people who are caught up in it, particularly vulnerable children who are caught up in it. So this budget will help us do more of that. And based on the evidence from the year we're just ending now, we'll have another 16 officers. So that's on top of the 146 and the 7 and the 50 bringing forward, another 16 additional officers dedicated to doing this work. And my estimate is that they'll be able to disrupt more than 150 other drugs networks, to arrest more than 300 organised crime criminals, as I've said, and to protect about 150 more young people. Those are significant numbers. Those are real lives safeguarded and real crime stopped. But we know it's not just all about drugs in our cities, of course. So investment in Country Watch, really important to us operationally. We know that organised crime groups go into farms, they go into rural communities, they steal quad bikes and machinery. We know that's to fuel and fund crime elsewhere. We know that. So this budget enables an additional £150,000 purely for all those rural crime initiatives to keep those rural communities safer again. Better justice for victims and more criminals held to account. I've mentioned the backlog in courts. I'm worried about it. We should all be worried about it. And that's, you know, in spite of great efforts by individuals. I in no way criticise partners. They are doing all that they can, but there are hard facts. So this budget will enable us to meet the required standards of victim care, witness care, who are often waiting there a very long time, because we know we've got a further backlog of 200 Crown Court cases, 2,500 magistrate court cases in our area at this time, and that list continues. But I also want, and it was kind within the question that the Commissioner answered in his remarks, you know, absolutely we are held to be good by our inspectorate, but they judge us on what we can do. I am uncomfortable with the areas that at the moment I can't do because of the affordability gap. Which, being such a poorly funded constabulary from central grant, and we've been through that every year, I know, means. So I want to be able to investigate more crime that happens. So, you know, I'm very careful with my projections of numbers, because one crime does not relate to another in terms of investigative effort, of course. And COVID-19 does bring a different set of dynamics as well to crime investigation. But I do want to be able to investigate significantly more crime. My estimate is I can do upwards of 25,000 more crime investigations. I want to do that. It's what I know the Commissioner wants me to do, and it's absolutely what the public want me to do. But there are hard facts around affordability. This will help close that gap much more than I'm currently able to do. But of course, I'd much rather crime didn't happen at all. Yes, we should investigate it, but I'd much rather it was prevented. Of course I would. So again, this budget enables a real investment in yet more prevention work, particularly diverting younger people away from crime. And that's so crucial for them, but also so crucial for our communities. So this budget, if granted, enables us to prevent 1,000 more crimes a year that young people might be tempted to go and do, and that's 1,000 fewer victims. So those are just some headlines drawn out from the paper. I understand, and the questioner was cautious. I understand that caution, and I also know that each member of the panel will have thought really carefully ahead of this meeting and will have considered the papers very carefully about what their own view is. But please be assured, I do not make this operational recommendation lightly, Chair. The stark truth is the budget this year, if granted, allows me as Chief Constable, in a way I have never been able to do before, to take the fight to the criminals that I absolutely know is necessary. I know we are a really great constabulary. We can do it, and we can do it well, and spend every public pound very, very wisely indeed. And I genuinely feel it's an opportunity that we can't afford to miss. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chief Constable, for your input. And members like me, I'm sure, will be considering all the points you've made. Members, just to remind you that we have a proposal, but before I do, a couple of things to make clear. First of all, we have received apologies from Councillor Dave McKinney, who's been taken into work, so he's not going to join us today. In relation to your declaration of interest, it is accepted that all members probably on this call are council taxpayers, and so that doesn't prevent you. That's not an interest you need to declare. We declare that anyway. Also, we recognise that councillors have geographical council representation interest, myself, the Isle of Wight, and so on and so forth. But that's also accepted. So I'm going to remind you now of what we're considering. I'm then going to ask our Finance Working Group lead, Michael Coombs, to provide some comment, and then we will move to the questions that we have prepared for the Commissioner.
Chairman, apologies
Yes.
for the interruption. I think the Commissioner had further comment to make.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner. I thought we were going to 1, 2 and in. My apologies there. Back to you.
Chairman, as you were not identifying something, just to let you know, I was going to highlight some of the consultation elements to thank those who attended the focus groups and to indicate that this year, unlike previous years, the focus groups were significantly restricted by COVID and therefore have a lower weighting, and to remind people of the 66.1% support, 8,348. And then if we can go to the next slide, just the clarity with which every part of our area voted yes. There were, as I said, some votes against, which I fully respect, but in each case there was a majority. And I just point out this year there were very few who didn't have a view. So it is a very helpful and clear presentation of the priority majority for yes, but I will never, other than respect those who had a different view. Just to say that we're very careful about looking at proportional representation and making sure we reach all our area. I think the working groups and you, Chairman, may have heard that as we progress through the consultation, we identify where there are shortnesses in particular communities or demographics, and we try to add some focused questioning to balance those out. This year, that exercise by my data teams produced some, again, added value and some greater balance than without it we would have had. And then there are just 4 sentences of conclusion from me. You've heard from the Chief Constable. She and I are in our different voices, which is important to stress, as compelled by the recommendation that's in front of you. And from the detail in the full report in front of you, I hope you will conclude that it's necessary to support, to make the investment to enable the Constabulary to continue to be a modern, operationally effective police service. You heard it best in the Chief's voice just now. It's necessary for supporting the training and equipment of the additional officers in Uplift, which comes from the National Fund, but needs some local resilience too. And the clarity that the whole report looks at not just everything for the Constabulary, but the forecast ahead for the midterm financial strategy, which demonstrates that this is not a just immediate hit. So it's necessary for that reason. And as you will have read in the detailed finance report provided to you, and as the finance working group, we were delighted to support in a very detailed look, it's necessary for ensuring the reserves remain adequate to meet the significant number of known cost pressures and risks during a time of exceptional change and uncertainty. And I personally welcome the focus of the finance working group, who made clear what the descriptions of those reserves should be so that they could properly reassure and quality assure them. And I believe that we have better presented it this year than at any time and with greater clarity. My proposal, I believe, will keep our communities safer, and together we must continue on this journey of supporting policing in our area. And I hope I will have your full support and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Just a question to start. The slides that you very kindly presented, through Caroline, could these be circulated to all the members? Because I think it will be useful communication to the residents of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight to see exactly what is being proposed. I thought it was a very clear list, and there's an opportunity as councillors representing their local authorities particularly to pass that communication on. So is that okay? Can't see any problem there, but is that fine?
Of course.
Yep, that's so members, just to remind you that the proposal we're now going to consider is that the Police and Crime Panel, PCP, support the Police and Crime Commissioner's proposed precept increase of £15 per annum for a Band E properties, which is the equivalent of £1.25 per month or 29p per week. Can I firstly call on the Finance Working Group Chair, Michael Coombs, to provide an overview of their discussions and recommendations, and then we will go to the questions that are prepared and we can clarify those in due course. Michael Coombs.
Chair, I must start by echoing what you said about our appreciation to the staff, but I target those comments specifically to all the people who've been involved in pulling together this budget proposal within the Constabulary, and also within the Commissioner's office, the people who worked on the consultation. It's almost beyond my comprehension to see how this can all be done in these times with remote working and so on. So we really do appreciate that. And I'd include in that James Payne, who's worked with the working group. We've met on 4 occasions since November, and I'll just run through very briefly what we've covered to try and reassure the panel about the process and the things that we've challenged. So we looked back a year ago to what the medium-term financial strategy was telling us then about what the precept increase that a balanced budget would require in 2021-22, and at that point it was 1.99%. We then moved to an analysis which showed an increase of 3.5% would be needed to maintain the current policing provision. And then, as you all know, in the subject of today's meeting, the precept level that is being proposed that would enable investment in local policing and the enhancement of services. We challenged around how savings were being looked for in budgets. We did as we always do, which is look back at recent years in terms of whether the budgets that have been agreed at a high level have been spent, and we asked questions about the underspend in 2019-2020, and we also explored fairly early views about how this current year is going to be an outturn. We've been through all of the proposals in the report, so I won't repeat those. They're all covered. Suffice to say that if this precept is approved, us and the plan working group will be going back to check and explore the extent to which things that have been promised in this report actually in the end are delivered. 2 members of the working group attended were asked to observe the consultation event, and if I'm asked, as I have been, to report the sort of consensus of the working group, I would say that we have been satisfied around the process from what we've heard, both in terms of how the budget is put together and how the proposals have been formulated. We have looked also at the consultation, and I think it's fair to say that from what we know, this commissioner has probably consulted with more people than most other places, and we do recognise that in these difficult times, it has been really difficult to get a representative sample in order to help inform our decision. I have to say, I think we do still have reservations about how representative the surveys and the focus groups are of the wider population. But in saying that, I want to make it really clear that we ourselves can't actually think of a way of making it more representative. And therefore, I think really the staff in the Commissioner's Office have really done the best that is possible in the current circumstances to get that representative view. So in summary, the working group is satisfied around how robust the process is. The one issue that we are concerned about, and it won't surprise anybody, is this question of affordability, and that's been addressed in both what the Commissioner and the Chief Constable have said to us today. So I think at that point, Chair, I'll stop. But if any of the members of the working group want to add anything, perhaps they would like to do so. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. As always, these things take a little bit of time technologically for me to switch my microphone back on. So, members, the process now is we have 7 questions prepared, although I believe part of them may have been answered. And if the questioner is satisfied with the answers already received, then it's not necessary to ask the question, but I'll call the name. And I'm mindful that in at least 3 of those, we do have some supplementaries prepared as well. So I'll go first of all to Councillor John Beavis. John, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. At our meeting last February, members expressed caution over the potential impact on residents in meeting any future increases in the precept. How has affordability for residents been considered within this proposal?
Thank you, Councillor Beavis. It was at the start point of the analysis to go for it. I'm very conscious of the percentage increase looking large, and the physical sum of money that will be raised is lesser. I've looked at the business case for the risks that would go to communities, and so my first part of the answer is to say, recognizing that some people will struggle to afford it and some will not be able to afford it, that's a process of realizing their tax. There are elements in the budget that recognize the risk of a shortfall in council tax take, the income that comes from it. For very many in our area, the sum will not be an issue. That's straightforwardly what we heard in the consultations and have heard over the whole time that I've been the Police and Crime Commissioner. But the test for me has to be if I were to reduce it overall, we would fail to deliver the operational stance that you've heard from the Chief Constable, which I found compelling. We would lose the opportunity of the money for those who can and have demonstrated by 66-point-something% that they would wish to pay that. And very largely those people who've said, yes, will have considered their affordability. But I am concerned about the true cost of all the rises in other areas of life and the loss of income, and the risk going forward of being considered for how we can look at that in the future with an understanding of what the reality is. So I started with 0 for the reasons that underlie your question. I found myself compelled to say we could not allow our communities overall to be less safe. I went up to what would hold the fort at where we were and realized, as you heard from the Chief Constable and will have heard from others, that the community want more and are concerned about some of the gaps, the things I think the Chief Constable said that she can't do, that concern her and concern me, and most importantly concern our community. And therefore I arrive at the answer that I've given. But I reassure everybody, it was firmly on my mind, is consistently on my mind, and it will stay under review.
Thank you. Michael Coombs, you had a prepared supplementary question unless it's been answered.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's really just, could the Commissioner assure us how, based on current practices, we can be assured that this budget, both in total and in terms of the individual components of it, will be spent by the end of the year? And in saying that, I recognise the Chief Constable has operational independence to actually move things around, but I think it's important that we understand the processes that his office has in place to monitor that A, the total is achieved, and B, the main components within that are achieved as well.
Thank you, Mr. Coombs. That's a really important question and was on my mind. The whole journey that I've been on as the Police and Crime Commissioner set me off when I arrived with significant funding pressures and a shortfall in fairer funding and a sense of dissatisfaction of the pressures that were created on policing and the pressures that were not being met in our communities. We have, and I believe I have contributed to creating an annual process that looks at scenarios, that doesn't just look in year for the next year, but looks the longer term and therefore avoids cliff edges and elements that will drop down. I believe that we have grown in our ability to present those scenarios and me to hear from the Chief Constable and her team what the options are and what her professional recommendation is. I believe she has felt more enabled to say what the professional need is rather than to tune herself to what the budget opportunities may be, which is as much my problem and significantly mine to consider. And in presenting those elements, this, I believe, is the most specific from the Chief Constable about the commitments of what this increase in council tax will deliver. And she absolutely understands and is determined to deliver to them. And that will be very properly, I think you were saying earlier, that you would wish to drive down as the Finance Working Group. And I believe all of the panel should want to drive down and ensure that we deliver what this money is about. And the last sentence that I give you is, and again, I think most of the panel will have heard me say this before, but I want to say how important this is to me, that when we raise the local council tax, I have been determined for the last 3 years that that has very evident and visible impact for the local people who are putting their hand into that pocket, and does not disrespect, which I've heard from the communities and informed members of the communities as well as people instinctively saying, we don't wish to pay any more to bail out a government that is not funding us fairer. And I believe that is a compelling argument. And it's one to see. And therefore, I have increasingly demanded, I think that's the right word, and received back, which is the good thing, the commitment that this increase in council tax for affordability from very local people in council tax terms will deliver in each district, in each borough, and across our community safer in some of the hidden and most awful of crimes, in some of the visible presence, in some of the proactive work for policing, in some of the prevention work for policing, and an appropriate balance of those things that underpin officers going forward well enabled to do their job. My short answer to your question, that I hope wasn't too long, but my short answer to your question is it will be monitored, it'll be checked, and in due time, my successor will have on record where the start point was and be able to continue appropriately the checks and controls to take it forward.
Thank you. I'm going to move to question 2, and Councillor Jan Warwick's going to ask this question, and there are 3 supplementaries to it. Councillor Warwick.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. And Commissioner, I just wanted to ask, because I think you've given a really good overview and presentation this morning, but can you just describe how you have scrutinised the Chief Constable's proposals to ensure that the spend is necessary, is appropriate, and indeed is sustainable, given that we're likely to have to make significant savings in the next financial year? Thank you.
Again, that's a really focused question. The first is it's always good to bring a bit of physical evidence. I'll switch off the back. Oh no, I can't. I don't know if I move it fast enough. No, it doesn't show. In my hand, I have a weighty tome of 7 volumes of the challenges since October and the drilling down into the detail that I've done. We've had more than 20 hours of personal engagement, the Chief Constable and I, based on those folders, which have hundreds of hours of preparation time and very senior staff and at the front line working contributions to it as well, and the particular specialisms doing it. This year, I have received significant respect as I've disrupted people's busy lives to ask the questions that people would want me to ask of the constabulary that are an operational answer, but that I need to be confident are the right answers on behalf of the public. And if they were presented with and had the time and the inclination to and the ability to hear the same answers, that they would have been persuaded that they are focused on the community's priorities. So I believe this year has been the best year of the journey so far. The Chief Constable and I have found our way to enable our teams to be better prepared, better enabled. And the thing that I like, if the Chief shakes her head or gives you some body language that she disagrees, is that the value of the process that we have is evident to the operational side of policing as it is to my responsibility to represent our communities and make the argument for them.
Thank you. Councillor Warwick, did you want to ask your supplementary as well?
No, I think actually that's been answered, because I think that my supplementary was around the consequences of not making this investment, and I think that's been covered in the presentation without going over that ground again. Thank you.
If I can, Councillor Warwick, I just want to reinforce one of the tests which drove me up to saying there is only one answer is we looked at the risks. And I challenge, I think the Chief Constable could give you a very long list of things that would add value that are not in this budget. The point that we got to, and it's really important that this is still attention into the future, is without this increase, the risk would come into exception for what any of us would be comfortable with to keep our communities safer. If fairer funding arrives, or if the economic climate makes it possible to invest more, we have a list of ready-to-go items that would make our communities even safer, and so that would have been an appropriate supplementary. I hope I've given you an answer to it.
No, thank you. That's great.
Thank you, Councillor John Beavis.
Well, again,
I don't know if your supplementary's been answered. It's up to you.
Yeah, my supplementary's been answered. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, John. Councillor Dave Shields, Did you have a supplementary, or has it been answered?
Just to test a little bit further, because I totally get the claims that have been really welcome, but the contribution from the Chief Constable and the commitments there, and I really was quite keen to hear about the Safer Streets, Bitton Station, and the support from the different staff groups there. Really quite compelling arguments. Fairer distribution of the resources, though, and I totally agree with the police and crime commissioner about a fairer funding formula, but a fairer distribution of the funding we do get is important to us in Southampton in terms of ensuring that additional resources are targeted areas where the crime is greatest. And I think that's the key question that people have been raising with us in Southampton about supporting this proposal.
So I'll start with an answer, Councillor Shields, and if the Chief Constable feels there's something especially operational to add, I'm content, Chairman, if you are, that she can add a sentence. So the first thing is, I look for proportionate responses to particular communities. I look to make sure I've heard from every district and borough and city. I make sure that we balance where we can and have fair use. You, Councillor Shields, will know amongst the most informed that we allow the individual districts and boroughs, the upper tier authorities, the cities, to tune it, not just to give you exactly identikit across the area, but to tune it to your priorities and engage with your budget as a key partner. The issue of, do we proportionately look at dispersing policing resources and other resources by the tax take? It's about keeping people safer, and sometimes the prevention and the need can be disproportionate, looking after the most deprived, the most vulnerable, those who are liable to victimhood, and those that prey on them may actually give some people in any particular moment the need for the priority for the Chief Constable to deliver on a high harm, high threat first approach. And this budget will allow us to drill down further in the way that the Chief Constable has described. So I would make the case to the public, and do make the case to the public when I meet them and when I meet more of them, that it's not just as straightforward as I've put £5 in, I want £5 out. Some people will get appropriately protection they don't see, appropriately support they haven't funded, because that's the need. But I'm always happy to continue the conversation. Chairman, if the Chief wants to come in, I'm happy to stop for a pause.
Thank you, Chief Constable.
Yeah, briefly, if I can, to that question, Councillor Shields, and in addition, because the Commissioner is absolutely right, but in addition to that, you'll have seen thus far that distribution of those additional officers in each of our areas. I know from feedback they are being seen and felt, and that will absolutely continue as we go into the additional officers in our visible roles in the year ahead. They obviously have to get into training, they have to come out of training, but they are, and they do, and they will be seen and felt. And that distribution is absolutely across the constabulary area without any gaps at all. So that increase is happening. To the additional point, though, when I talk about things like taking the fight to the criminals, to those investigations of crimes, they're also within locality too. But the investigators, as you'll know, are in our big investigation centres, which are all very new. We are looking, as Councillor Stewart said, regarding the Isle of Wight and other opportunities there. But those that are investigating local crimes, they happen to be in our investigation centres. So absolutely, they are all about preventing harm, investigating the most serious, stopping the bad things happening, getting ahead of the criminals, and that happens across our geography. And absolutely, I give that commitment.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Councillor Shields, for your question. It prompted one in my head, which probably might be informative for all members. Just how does consideration of the police priorities link with local authority priorities?
Significantly. The partnership is close. At a immediate level, the Chief Constable's deployment plan and engagement plan includes district commanders being absolutely fundamental core single points of contact for any issue in the moment, and the pushing and testing that they both have each other's immediate contact details is something that works really well. the position of ACC Blythe in terms of looking an overview, and the other dispositions are operationally for the Chief Constable to do. Absolutely, the key partners, I talk politically, my team talk within, we collaborate, cooperate, commission, whether it's from community safety partnerships as part of it, or the experts that are in all the councils at whatever level they're in. But again, Chairman, if you would like, and I notice the Chief's hand is up, I'm happy to defer to her for a comment if you would like that.
Yes, always good to hear from the Chief.
Thank you. Very briefly, in addition, that relationship is baked in to our policing model. So district commanders, so chief inspectors, superintendents dedicated to their local geographies, they are the go-to. They draw in and all the other wider resources and all the other elements that we have within the constabulary and beyond. They are the gateway for that, and they know their communities really, really well, and they know their partners really, really well. And I think the example I would use, which is where it's the data sharing and the information sharing that's so crucial. If we look at this nigh on 12 months now of COVID data sharing and COVID compliance, which policing has a role in, local authorities have a role in, and so many others, that layering of information and jointly sharing, where are we worried, what do we all need to do, and use the various tools that we have in our individual agency toolboxes, is very effective, and you can use that, and we do use that same model in crime matters also, but it's a very clear one, which is very front and centre to demonstrate that.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move to question 3. The questioner is Councillor Simon Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Michael, hopefully we're going to have elections in 2021 at some point. How well does this budget enable your office to support the next commissioner in delivering their police and crime plan? What does that cover note in the draw to this budget say to, I'm sure, all the candidates who will be watching the panel?
Good. Councillor Bound, thank you for your question. Yes, I would like there to be an election. The electoral mandate needs to be restored, reaffirmed in the right time. I think everybody knows that I am not standing. I took this as a duty to continue. I believe it was the right decision for safety that we deferred the elections last year. I neither lobbied nor was other than happy to have gone in due time. But this year has been an important year, and I've concentrated on it as the incumbent appropriately with the authority of the mandate I had in 2016, rightly so, I believe. So how will it match for my successor? When I am duly elected by an appropriate successor, I will hand over, I believe, the best working arrangements that I can have achieved in my tenure of holding this baton. There is nothing, one of the rules I set early on, but has become really pressing towards the end of last year, as I might have expected to hand over in May, and no less as we approach May this year, is I will not make any decisions that I would not be happy to receive myself. I make the best decision that I can for the longer term safety of our communities. There is no personal agenda to achieve for me. There is only a personal agenda to keep our communities safer. I made earlier the comment about the plan, the revision of the plan for a plan that the existing police and crime plan updated very early after the COVID lockdown is a plan that lands till 2022. That is always the case at the handover of an election or the continuation of others to do it. And I very especially and personally, I have a priority for this, look at the midterm financial strategy. So I am always looking further ahead than just next year or the next months when someone else will take over from me, to make sure that we have created the right plan. In terms of preparing people, I believe it's important that there be an understanding to any candidates of what the job is, and the Chief Executive organised appropriate briefing on the presumption that, as it is today, that there'll be a May 6th election, and somebody new in my chair shortly afterwards, and anybody who had nominated themselves. There are no official candidates at the moment, so there is no engagement with a determined successor to create a plan that they would wish to receive. There is just that focus on delivering to the plan that I created purposefully for this time, recognizing that for the first time since 2016, when the plan still stands up, this COVID has created a different future and a different reality for the time we're spending in. So that plan is the one in place. I absolutely come back every time and have had no conflict of interest with I will do the right thing, whatever it takes, while I have this job.
We can't hear you, Dave.
Yeah. Councillor Stewart, you're muted, I think.
My apologies.
Chairman, you're back.
I'm back. Yeah, first of all, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Simon, for the question. I haven't got any supplementaries nominated, and that may well be a question that's been fully answered. So unless anybody indicates, I'll now move to Councillor Trevor Cartwright. Trevor is going to ask a question number 4.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, Michael. My question is, what impact has the COVID-19 pandemic had on the proposals made through this budget? And I guess, to add to that also, the fact that with these coming months, probably a year, we don't actually know what's going to happen with COVID. We're in our 3rd lockdown. So I think that's all part of the question, actually. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Trevor. Commissioner.
Thank you. Again, an appropriate question. So the reason I wrote a new plan was because COVID was definitely going to have a massive impact. It's a game changer, and that's too trivial a thing. It's a life changer across the world, across the nation, and in our area. So it has a massive impact. My first response was to make sure that all those who provide frontline services in commissioning and the Chief Constable's team had whatever they needed to keep them as safe as we could engineer it and protect them so that they could continue their jobs. We opened our reserve pot to anything that was necessary. We went through issues about PPE supply, sustainability. Sometimes we got quite close to not having enough, but that process improved and developed. We went to changing how we were in physically in buildings for distance, for the funds that create immediate temporary working practices, then screens, then processes, then in due time we will rebuild. So the estate plan has changed to absorb that for the longer term as well as the immediacy. For those that we commission at the front line, we were about to go into another rhythm of bidding, funding bidding and expressions of changes and development of those things that keep support victims and keep the vulnerable safe. What I wanted people to do was to absolutely understand how to sustain the service at the front line, how to tune and give them permission to tune services at the front line to respond to COVID, and how to, in some limited number of cases, stop services and understand the financial situation. We got to everybody. We are we've done a second round, and we are in a round at the moment of looking at, as this lockdown has extended again, whether there are things that we can do to mitigate. I was very clear earlier on, and I hope the panel will, all of you have seen some evidence of this, of trying to say sometimes just a little bit of help can make the difference. And we did 500 words for £500 for anyone who came up with something that would make an immediate impact. Those very quick responses, sometimes to community assets that were no longer being visited, that needed remote CCTV or alarms or better locks or lighting around places so that you could distance yourself safely from the dark spaces, and other initiatives. There was one that I really liked. There was a volunteer who was brilliantly driving a personal van around his community delivering food. He was beginning to run out, it was a he on this occasion, was beginning to run out of funding for the fuel for the van. The ability and the encouragement for that person to have a couple of tanks of fuel made a big difference and was welcomed by the community. Smocks, there's another word for it, the hospital things, the sewing team in a number of our areas, 3 or 4 areas specifically, where the enthusiasm of those stitchers to make protective gear, washable gear for the team was running out of their ability to buy some of the material, and we had many volunteers offering to support that, but in a few cases I managed to buy another roll of whatever fabric it was, so that the enthusiasm of our communities could keep them busy doing it. So I think, Councillor, right, the answer to has COVID impacted everything? Yes, absolutely, in those ways. And fundamentally, it's informed the future, because I believe the midterm financial strategy will represent that there will be changes to the estate programme, changes to the need to continue to be safe, to understand what safe means for PPE and other issues. The awfulness, every single one of is so offensive to all of those people in policing, of people actually spitting at policing at this time, creating that risk. Some of the those, I mean, it just is beyond belief, except that it's a reality of going forward. So making sure that we know about what single crewing is, what the distancing spaces are, what if there were to be a resurgence after an improvement of some risk, how we would have plans in place to go back to a safe element, not as an emergency measure, but as a routine that our estate and our practices would enable us to do. So yes, fundamentally across everything is the short answer.
Thank you. Did I hear you say scrubs? And I wasn't quite sure what you meant. I was thinking of a prison at that moment, but I'm not right there. Did you sort of clarify?
I think that's some article of overwear.
Okay.
Hospital overwear.
Thank you. Unless any members want to supplement on that, I'm going to move to James Radley. Councillor James Radley, if you wouldn't mind asking your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I was very pleased in your presentation to see that you called out you'd taken special efforts to ensure that you had a representative response across the Isle of Wight and Hampshire, because we do live in a very diverse community and our population do engage with the police no matter where they sit in any demographic. But I wondered, have you identified any particular lessons in reaching out to those hard to reach groups that you'd like to pass on to your successor, so that in future years it's going to be straightforward and we can be more certain that the feedback you get is truly representing the people that the police serve in this area?
Yeah. Councillor Radley, that's a pertinent, relevant question, and it's one that's on my mind quite a lot. I welcome those who pay close attention to what the Police and Crime Commissioner does, and I'm sure the Chief Constable will have a version of that to people who pay attention to what policing does. They sometimes can be voluminous correspondence with the same people to whom we're happy to give the right answers to the questions they give. The ones I believe the Constabulary is keen about, and no less and no more am I, as a priority, is those people who don't contact us, those people who we need to find. I purposefully recruited Anya Kimberley, who's on my staff, as a data analyst and engagement person who can provide us statistics from national databases and across our area, specific targeting information to know that some communities are not currently engaging with us. And as I think I was saying earlier about the consultations, which is not the long and the short of it, but it's just a part of it, we do identify where we know we have communities and they're underrepresented in the responses or the access to surveys or comments or other elements of it. You asked, will I leave a note? I think I'll leave an organisation that knows how to do that well, and absolutely be willing for anything that I've done to be shared with my successor, which isn't always the case, it might be clear. I have been accessible, public and accountable and auditable throughout my time, and whatever brickbats that I've received, sometimes I believe unfairly, are nevertheless things that I will respond to. And I believe I've left a track record of direction to my team and growth in how we are truly representative and understand the risks in our communities, the engagement in our communities that I share with partners, and it is a very partnering arrangement for those communities realizing life opportunities, and the progress we've made that mustn't fall back. We do quite a lot in different languages and presentation of that, which can sometimes be disabling. Some of the hearing and visual impairment issues, things that we need to do. I'm not aware that we're on subtitles as we are at the moment. Sometimes that knocks the digital a bit awry, but those sort of accessible elements of it, and the clarity of not presuming about ethnic or other issues. And then, of course, I go back to the sadness elements. There were some completely unacceptable examples in the year, as there always are, and some terrible ones that are visible at the moment, of just abuse and awfulness and inappropriate activities unacceptable to any vibrant, free society. It's a continuing theme. I don't believe it'll be resolved soon. We make progress where we can, and I'm very happy to hear from anyone who can add value to it, and do hear from some people that do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to move to question 6, which is from Councillor Lisa Griffiths on behalf of the panel.
Hi, good morning, Commissioner. Thanks very much for the presentation. I think it was really interesting. How do you intend to communicate that to residents? I think, there's a lot of value in that presentation this morning, and I think, keeping it simple to share it with them. How are you going to get that message across to make sure they understand?
Councillor Griffiths, that's again, I hope it won't surprise you that that's on my mind too. The Chief and I are doing a compass session very shortly after hopefully your fulsome support for this and therefore landing of it, which is the question and answer session for me asking the questions and the Chief Constable answering to those things that are of community concern. This is going to be a particular focus for me to ask the questions in the voice of our communities, sometimes very simple questions, apparently, and to make sure that from that set of answers that they hear the Chief's voice in a community voice to express the answers for that to them. We all the time try to put up snippets so that it's not indigestible. There are plenty of people, and I'm glad for them, who will read the whole paper and scrutinise it and pick out a sentence or something that they want to know more about. We hear from those people regularly and routinely. Those who have a detailed and informed, we like the engagement with those who have specialist contributions. We engage with the universities quite often. We use their input to inform future plans. But the immediate accessibility is to try and put it out in our comms media so that it's accessible in appropriate, not spun, but appropriate, accessible form. And I'm conscious of that. Anyone who has ideas of someone we're not meeting or some formulation that would reach their communities, please let me or my team know. We will seek to understand your advice too.
Thank you. Can I just have a quick follow-up? So how
Yes.
will you monitor that and also ensure that that you can show to the residents that their money has been well spent, so that they have a progress report throughout the year, really, just to keep them informed. So when it comes to this process next year, they understand what you've been doing and how it's been working.
It is very much the PCC's responsibility and our team's responsibility to communicate throughout the year those things that we are doing, and to make sure people understand what is going on in their communities and to listen to them as it happens. For particular headline elements of it, the safer streets, for example, where there will be some additional investment, those will be things we want to announce as we do them. Some of the estate improvements will be visible to the communities as we open some new resources or as we celebrate successes operationally. as we acknowledge the risks in communities and seek people's support to help us bring people to account, as we write reports for all those things that I commission and value the people and give them visibility so that people seeking services will know there are services that are delivering. So there is a virtuous circle of a supplier of a service to the community at risk, a service user's good experience for that service, for our funding of it to repeat it, we demonstrate the value of it. We do quality assure. We're getting, I think when I arrived, understandably, PCCs hadn't been around for a while at all. I'm sorry, beg his pardon. There was a invest in good ideas approach. We have moved on in the last few years to invest in good ideas, certainly, but understand what works from that investment and repeat what works, reinforce what works. But again, I think the last question was asking, can we reach those people? So we shouldn't just invest in the usual people who know how to write investments. So again, we look for new opportunities where perhaps the natural funding streams need to be assisted to create the value of new ways to help people that are appropriate for now and the risks and vulnerabilities that they have. It's a big topic. Do ask more, and maybe it'll be a presentation at some point for the commissioning element of how that works for that.
Thank you, Lisa. Final question we've prepared comes from Ken Merchamp. I just want to check, Ken, that already provided information hasn't answered the question. I don't think it quite has, so you may wish to ask that question.
Thank you very much. But I notice there is a hand up. I don't know if you want to take that first.
Sorry, I missed that. I'll just need to go to...
I see no hand.
Apologies, Chairman.
It was me, Chair, but Ken's going next, and my question is going to follow.
That's Lee. Okay, yes, I've not lost sight of you.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, that's fine. So, Ken.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, Michael. Good morning, Olivia. I want to try and understand numbers of police officers going back from when we had this same meeting back in, I think it was January 2019. At the time, we were discussing a precept of £24. And in the conversation there, we were promised that £24 would fund a net gain of 265 officers. And that wasn't all PCs, that was investigation officers, and I think there was 1 or 2 PCSOs at that time. And then following year, January 2020, we were discussing a £10 precept, which promised us in the order of 220 officers. And as my memory serves me, that was some 150 or so from those promised with the government's 20,000 promise, plus an additional 60-70 that the precept would fund. Now, my calculation, just for those 2 years, brings me to a figure of somewhere in the order of 485 additional officers. Chief Constable, in one of her statements this morning, was saying yes, and that brings us to 401 additional officers net gain. I don't know where that gap is, and the reason I'm asking this is you will notice in one of the slides you put up, Michael, Rushmore was the least enthusiastic for an increase in precept of those that you asked. And I'm always being asked the question, well, where are these police officers? We're paying for them. Where are they? And I always go and look at the numbers, and I'm very confused with the numbers I see. The presentation you put on your update only goes back to March of last year. So I can't go prior to that and go, there they are. So my question is, can you confirm that the previous precepts I spoke of have met their targets in net gain? And if we approve this precept, it will ensure that the additional 150 odd this year, plus the anticipated early recruitment of an additional 50, it will mean that those staff do come on board and will be equipped. Thank you.
To the Commissioner, just because you may not be able to see what I can see, but you may, the Chief Constable is happy to make comment if you wish to invite her to do so.
Yeah, I'd be delighted for her to, after I just do a couple of sentences of engagement. So first of all, I know one or two of you in the panel, and you're not alone. There are other people around, and you're not alone because the Chief and her team and I and my team pay a great deal of attention to this. You're asking a particular and a detailed question. The most recent set of figures that we've given you are a slide about the Uplift officer pipeline and the Uplift Year 1 tracker numbers, as well as a spreadsheet of the disbursement by rank and by number in the various areas of the constabulary as the constabulary sits at the moment. At any time, there'll be snapshots of those things that are about retention and about recruitment of new to the force people, and there'll be tests from government about uplift numbers who set a baseline before we get the money of sustainability to establishment and a whole raft of technical issues. So I'll let the Chief give you an immediate answer, but what I do say is that those things are probably best enabled for you by actually having the spreadsheets out in front, and for you, Ken, or for other of your colleagues who want to do it to work through in detail, so we can ask and answer, and you can point by point say your content or what your further questions are. But the detail of it for the moment, I will get lost in the numbers. I have the current ones in front of me and the current expectations for recruiting in front of me. If you don't get what you need now, I'm very happy to take that out of the meeting, but we'll hand over to the Chief just at the moment.
Thank you. So as the Commissioner said, really happy to go through the detail here. And I was very careful in my words. In fact, I corrected myself in order to try not to confuse further in my remarks earlier in the meeting, because I will absolutely not claim is that officers that I am recruiting who are replacing those who have naturally concluded their career are additional budget, because they're not. They're merely normal turnover of a normal workforce. And I'm very clear to split out that versus growth. And the language we use, and again, there is a lot of detail, very happy to do it. It's very clear. I've been through it with other members of the panel in the past. Happy to do that as often as is necessary, is where our establishment is. So, on paper, how many have we got that are afforded, budgeted for, versus how many we've recruited. And, that can fluctuate naturally. But to give you a sense, 2 years ago, when we were sat in this meeting, the budget that was agreed then, we recruited 265 people. Some of those were replacing those leaving, and some of them were additional folk. This time last year, very clear about what was going to be additional, and that's why that upward of 400 figure of people who have come through our doors comes from, but they are split into those who are replacing those leaving us and those who are brand new, because our numbers in terms of our afforded posts have gone up. To give you a sense, so I've got the figures which the Commissioner refers to in front of me as well. Excuse me, looking down to check them. So as of the 31st of March 2020, our establishment, so our paid for posts, officers only, this is only officers, was 2,681.
Yep.
We actually had in post 2,607. So at that point in time, that little snapshot, we had fewer people in, fewer officers in than we had budget for, because people come in waves. They come in lumps of 80, 90, 60, they come in that kind of way. Come 31st of March this current year, our budget, our establishment is 2,937. We'll actually be above that though at 2,962. And again, there's a lot of detail in between those two ends of the year, but we've got that month by month, year on year, all the way through. And you can appreciate that the numbers coming in, because they come in lumps of 60 and 80, you do get these literally step changes of officers I am employing versus what the budget can sometimes do, which is perhaps a smoother curve. I hope that explains a bit, but really happy as the Commissioner is to go through the detail of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Hunt, did you want to come in? Councillor Lee Hunt, sorry, I was reading that. Do you want to come in with a supplementary on this issue?
I'm most grateful and good morning, Mr. Lane and Chief Constable. Yeah, I mean, before we had a pre-meeting before, of course, and this came up, and it comes up every single time. And I don't want to be mean about it or anything like that, but it's like herding cats in a way. Probably not to you because you see the figures, I guess, all of the time. But I think the problem is that people are seeing these inverted commas new police officers coming along, and they think that's reaching the 1,000 that were lost. I think it's this aspiration to get back those 1,000 police officers that were lost, maybe is in the equation. But from everything that I see and hear, the officers that have been recruited the last 2 or 3 years seem to be covering wastage rather than causing well, that's good. So what I would like to ask then is, do you think, I know we do get information sent out, but do you think all councils, all local authorities could be sent an email, say annually, as to what the establishment of the Hampshire Constabulary is every at that particular time, and what the actual persons in post is at that particular time? And I think that would help, because we need to be open and transparent. And if members of the crime panel are confused about it, they really are, Chief Constable, they don't really know, Mr. Lane, and then the public doesn't have much of a chance. So just some openness and transparency would be very helpful, if that's all right.
Okay, so Councillor Hunt, I hear your question, and thank you for raising it in your voice, which is very clear. My immediate reaction is we'll take that under account, and we'll come back to how we present our information and check for what we can do to improve. But I make this point. You go back to a shortfall of quite a few years ago, and lots of people do. I take the responsibility of what we have now and how we plan for the future. And from 2016, since I've been the Police and Crime Commissioner to now, we have needed to protect numbers. That was not lose more. We have needed to add numbers when opportunity presents, and to fight to do that because it's appropriate to. And it included winning an argument at the national level that the government chose to make as one of its highest priorities for the uplift, but it's also to sustain. So those three words are where quite often you can misinterpret some people purposely, not yourself. And I think it is important that the numbers are understood. You know, bearing an establishment, for those who work in this area, they understand the difference. But for me, in the journey that I've been on, we have stopped further cuts. That's protect at several points, and some of that is important now. We have added, that's uplift and purposeful, from the local council tax increases over the last 2 years, and not unrelated to our recruiting people early now, which would be an add that comes out of your approval, I hope shortly, of this budget. And sustaining, which is what the Chief was saying, the natural churn of people retiring, of people choosing to go at times that suit them, and our replacement of those people. So, but we're more than happy to engage over that conversation to discover what report or what information helps you reconcile that yourself and removes confusion or misunderstanding, and I'm sure that'll be a continuing journey.
Yeah, sure.
And
Thank you.
Thank you.
The finance working group has made clear that that's what they intend to do.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, Lee, I think as an opportunity here, post-precept approval, to articulate the current and projected numbers in the way the Chief Constable's just done. It's very clear. And then that could be moved into the plan working group agenda, so that we can reflect next year on not only where we were, but how we are. And I think that's good. I see Simon, the chair, so agreeing that. So So I think that concludes our questions. I just want to make one comment, and then I'm going to open up to members to have what we call the debate. In other words, to make statements they wish to make. My comment is I am disappointed to hear of the response of a few members of the public who are verbally and physically abusing our frontline officers at this time. And I wish to reassure the constabulary through the Chief Constable and the Commissioner of the panel's full support in them robustly addressing this conduct. And I'm sure I'm speaking for every panel member. So thank you very much, Commissioner, for the questions and responses. And I'll now invite any members who want to make any comments. This is not the vote, this is just your individual comments as a result of what we've heard. And I'll ask Caroline to do the impossible job of trying to monitor hands, which is always a bit difficult.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Ken Mushat was first.
Okay, Ken.
There we go. Thank you. I would just like to say that prior to the start of this meeting, I was very much sitting on the fence, which isn't normal for me, on whether how one should go with this request for precept. But having heard the details and having seen the response to from James with regards to perhaps getting this on a working group with regards to the numbers thing, and that is a big problem for me because it's the residents, the messages we get from our residents here are simply that we don't see these extra police. We're paying, we don't see them, and I have had difficulty justifying that. So with that, the future in mind, and the hope for this deep dive opportunity on the data with Olivia and Michael, then I am now minded to vote for this precept. Okay.
Thank you, Ken. Caroline, next person. I can see.
Councillor Lee Hunt.
Okay, Councillor Hunt. You're on mute, Councillor Hunt. He's not responding at the moment. Next person, Caroline, please.
I haven't got any other hands visible to me at the moment.
Is Councillor Cartwright?
Was that me?
I'll come back to you, Lee. Councillor Cartwright.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Chairman. I found what we've heard today very helpful. I was very concerned, well, still am very concerned about affordability, and I fully understand where the Chief Constable and the Police Crime Commissioner are coming from. £40 million underfunded doesn't help anybody. I think I really ought to just point out also that us in our local authorities are also in very similar positions in that way. I think it's important to actually understand that. Government funding to us is negligible, to be perfectly frank. We're probably talking of a maximum of a £5 increase, which is a penny a day effectively. But it's it's important because I think the other point is if you take Fair as an example, we're losing an awful lot of revenue because of the closure of our leisure centres, car parking and everything else. So we've had to do an emergency budget to cover that situation, and thank goodness we had reserves to cover some of that. But I think it's important that people just understand, it's not just the police in that respect, it's across the whole of Hampshire in that way. However, I think the other important thing is, as chairman of the Fair and Community Safety Partnership, I also think it's very, very important to support the police in this instance, and that's what I'll be doing. I think my other point was really a request, really is, I look at the investment in police estates, and you won't be surprised that we've been talking about facilities in Fareham for 7 years now. I would perhaps like to see if we could perhaps get that sorted a bit quicker. So many thanks. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Trevor. Narinda Baines, Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Chairman. The main issue around this was affordability from my perspective. We have businesses going under and residents losing their jobs in our local communities due to the pandemic. And if I'm being honest, I would have liked the Commissioner to present the panel with a number of options for consideration. But, and it's a big but, after listening to the Chief Constable's operational argument and reinforcing the recommendations, which I am assured will benefit our communities, especially more frontline policing, I am minded to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Narinder, thank you. And probably that's a good example because we've heard it several times now. Just advising the Commissioner to have the Chief Constable come along today, I think has been a very positive, helpful addition to the meeting. So I am extremely grateful for that. I'm just looking at my list. I've got Councillor Tony Jones, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my concern is affordability, I must admit, and I'll be honest with you, I said before the meeting that I wasn't going to support this because I felt it was unaffordable to a lot of people, but I feel I will be voting for it. But I'd like all you councillors and county councillors to actually put your heads up and get fighting for fairer funding. And plus, when we do our budgets, I'm a councillor for Basingstoke, even though I'm representing another group, that we actually look at our funding. We can't always go to the top end. And obviously, last 3 years on the police, on this thing, they get the top end. And it looks likely a lot of the council and county councils are going top end. As a country, as a Hampshire, we can't afford it. Someone's got to give them. If they can't, it's fine. We've got quite wealthy people, or people who can afford it. It's the ones that can't that end up in the biggest trouble. And most probably in the end, they might be seen by the police or wherever because of they're running out of money. I think it has to be said that, as far as I'm concerned, in future, I wouldn't be looking for top-end funding for police or for anything. We need to actually look at our budgets and actually lobby government. That's where I'm coming from. But the presentation was good, really good. I must admit, I thank the Chief Constable and Michael for their presentation. It does open it up. And it's a pity we can't really get it out there to the people, especially the ward I represent, what is actually happening. It's some way we've got to try and do that. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That was very well articulated. Councillor Jan Warwick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add, I was very privileged to be invited to sit in on one of the Precept focus group meetings, and I sat there quietly, and it was just such an interesting debate, and it was an informed debate. So I think that message is really clear. Everybody recognised that the affordability of a significant Precept rise is going to be a challenge, because it won't just be the police, it'll be the fire authorities, it'll be the county council, it'll be the district council. So that bill, when it arrives, is going to be a shock, and I'm really aware of that, and I guess going to government is an interesting one, and the whole debate around the fair funding formula, which nearly came to fruition in 2015 and then didn't, because what you give to one, you take away from another force, is going to be a difficult issue to square, I suspect. But I think I'm supportive of this Precept rise, because I think it's important. I think we need to fund the police properly and correctly, and I've been so impressed by how they've behaved over this whole crisis COVID period. What I think did come through from residents, and I hope some of them are listening in this morning that were part of that focus group, is they really wanted to see that police presence. But what I'm aware of is there's so much that goes on behind the scenes, and perhaps residents are not always aware of that. So if there's a way of conveying, there's a huge amount of anti-terrorist and anti-corruption work that goes on that you don't visibly see walking around the streets. And if somehow we can convey that message, I think that would be very helpful to reassure the public that their money is being spent in the right way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor David Shields.
Thank you, Chair. Really good discussion, debate. Listening to all the others, there's not an awful lot that I disagree with. Just one point I wanted to raise, though, that in our consultation, which we've been doing as well around our proposals as a city council, I was struck that people from relatively small respondents from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, but where they have responded, are much more concerned about increases in taxes because it's affecting them in the types of work that they're doing. And I just wondered, there's some concerns there that we need to take on board. The other thing is, I think it's not been clear, but expectations were raised previously about numbers, and the reality of the situation is it takes time to recruit, to train and to deploy. And I think there's some sense of frustration in some people about they haven't seen the benefit yet from the additional investment. And I'm very much hoping we will start to see a lot more of that in this calendar year, and that will go a long way to reassuring the public that have been concerned about that. So I think the view from Southampton is very much a sort of a provisional support for the proposal, but we look forward to working with the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Chief Constable about getting these people out in our communities as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Very clear. Lisa, Councillor Lisa, I think I saw your name with a hand up, unless it's an old one.
Yeah, no, I would like to just make a comment.
Yeah.
Like all the others that have spoken, I am concerned about increasing costs for residents at this time. But I've done a quick poll where I live this morning, and I would say probably 85–90% of people are saying, if not more than that, are saying yes, actually they think it's the right thing to do. And I think if the community is saying that, then my view would be that yes, we should support that.
Thank you, Lisa. That's very informative. Councillor Simon Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to build on some of those points. We've been working very hard with the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and officers from the Constabulary regarding numbers and where new officers are appeared in the past. And I think there's something that we shouldn't shy away from. We often conflate frontline policing with neighbourhood policing. And I think working harder to understand what specialist teams there are and how they work frontline in our communities is something that we shouldn't shy away from. And I think that's one of the things that we've come against, really, is that those specialist teams are seen as working frontline, are supporting our communities, and we just need to do a better job to get that message over.
Thank you, Simon. I think it's a very fair point. Councillor Lee Hunt.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you'll be pleased to know I've reduced my little speech from 10 pages down to a couple of paragraphs. I have got something to say, quite frankly, and I just want to remind members that the Chief Constable came to us, I think it's about a year, 18 months, a couple of years back, anyway, when soon as she started, pledging to protect neighbourhood policing. And from my experience, at least, she's kept to that promise. So Miss Pinckney, she was honest back then too. She told us, if you remember, that she needed to reduce PCSOs, who are very popular, in order to invest more in investigative officers, and for good reason. And she touched, I think it's been touched on today, modern day slavery, child grooming, and she mentioned county lines, as did Mr. Lane. They blight our communities, and the Chief has said she wants to take that fight into our communities. So she's also pledged to invest in neighbourhood policing, taking that fight to criminals blighting our communities. And I think her record shows she means business. And we'll be here with those gentle reminders that others have been talking about today, that people are struggling to pay their bills. Some people are having to make decisions between heating their homes and actually eating. But if we go ahead with this precept today, and it looks like we are, it means that we are all joining those hard-working officers across the county and in cities that are fighting on our behalf. And it is a partnership. We know our officers are well led. The Chief Constable is very good, and we've got wonderful superintendents and commanders across the county. Someone touched on the business at Basingstoke. Well, I suffered years back. I suffered very badly indeed. And I have faith in the police, who seem to me to be right at the forefront of equality across our country, actually, in our communities. The police are in the vanguard of that. And to see the changes that have come in over 30 years is quite phenomenal. And I hope that the blip we saw at Basingstoke won't ever happen again. But I fear it will. But she is on guard about that, and she seems to go the extra mile. She also promised to look at 101, and she's doing that. And here in Portsmouth, we're pleased to see that the investment going to go into the Marine unit. That's important to us, as say, modern day slavery, child grooming, and domestic violence, which was talked about too. Lastly, as I said, this is a partnership. And here in Portsmouth, as Councillor Shields mentioned what they were doing over in Southampton, here in Portsmouth, we're keeping our end too. We're keeping our end of the bargain too. We've doubled community wardens, continuing to invest in safeguarding citywide CCTV systems, which I want to have a conversation with the new commissioner about, and including more mobile cameras every year and training more officers to go after criminals to seize their ill-gotten gains under POCA, the Proceeds of Crime Act. So, Chairman, we're joining the Chief Constable and her officers in taking the fight to the criminals in a partnership. I'm sorry I went on so long, but it's important to me, and I think anyone listening here, and certainly the population of Portsmouth. So forgive me for being rather longer than most of you. Thank you very much indeed.
That's all right, Lee. I'm learning to understand how you operate, but it's very good. Last but by no means least, I'm going to ask Councillor John Beavis to make his comments, and then I'll take members back to the vote. So, Councillor John Beavis.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Affordability has been mentioned several times, and let's make no mistake about it. This does represent a well above inflation increase of 7.1%. That is significant. However, as part of the working group on finance, I have to say that the questions that we put to James Payne and the presentations from James at that working group were very good. And today, both the Commissioner and the Chief Constable, I think, have given us a really sound presentation. And as the Chairman of the Gosport Community Safety Partnership, messages like more frontline police and more visibility of police on the street, improvements to the command management platform, that's the 101 calls and the 999 calls. I mean, this is an area where we do need improvement. That's addressed in this budget. More investigations of crime, again, really important. Additional safeguarding for over 12,000 vulnerable people. Really good news. Increasing the crime prevention measures, and most of all, that terrible battle against county lines drug dealing. I think all of these things are so important to our communities, and this increase gets my full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. So members, I'll now take us to the voting situation. Firstly, I'll remind you of the proposal we are now going to consider, and that is that the Police and Crime Panel, PCP, support the Police and Crime Commissioner, the PCC, his proposed precept increase of £15 per annum for Band D properties, which is the equivalent of £1.25 per month or 29p per week. The members, I would also then ask you to follow the voting process, and Caroline will call out your name, and then you just say whether for, abstain or against. So I'll pass you over to Caroline.
Thank you, Chairman. So starting please with Councillor Diane Andrews.
For.
Councillor Narinda Baines.
For.
Councillor John Beavis.
For.
Councillor Simon Bound.
For.
Councillor Trevor Cartwright.
For.
Councillor Lisa Griffiths.
For.
Councillor Lee Hunt.
For.
Councillor Philip Lashbrook.
For, Chairman.
Councillor Ken Mushamp.
For.
Councillor Dave Radley. Oh, sorry, apologies. Councillor James Bradley.
For.
Councillor Dave Shields.
For.
Councillor Dave Stewart.
For.
Councillor Tony Jones.
For.
Councillor Brian Lamming.
For.
Councillor Lynn Stagg.
For.
Councillor Jan Warwick.
For.
Michael Coombs.
For.
And Bob Perkis.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. That recommendation is carried with full agreement.
Excuse me. Thank you. Excuse me. The information we have heard today has highlighted the challenges faced by policing and the opportunities increasing the precept will present to help keep our communities safer. Excuse me, ma'am. It is appreciated that in meeting the cost of this increase will be borne by our residents, many of whom will be experiencing additional financial pressures as a result of the global pandemic. However, the same extreme uniqueness of the current situation has placed significant additional strain on our police officers and staff. The budget supported by the panel today will help secure and expedite the recruitment of an additional 146 police officers across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, increasing the visibility policing presence within our community, as well as retaining PCSOs and bolstering staff within the 999 and 101 call centres. As our residents would expect, the panel will, on their behalf, monitor the delivery of the promises laid out within the Commissioner's proposal and continue to support and scrutinise the Commissioner in the wider delivery of the Police and Crime PAM. In supporting the Commissioner's proposed PSIP today, the following is also noted by the panel. The recommendations from the Chief Constable to the PCC on her operational requirements for 21-22 onwards, and her request that the PCC support a precept increase of £15 to enable the delivery of those requirements as set out in Appendix A. That 61% of households across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are in properties in council band tax A to C and would therefore see a precept increase of less than £15 per annum. That the full precept increase will be utilised in support of local policing. The proposals in this report, which ensure that for 21-22 there will be significant investment in policing within Hampshire Constabulary policing area, including an increase in police officer numbers by 146 above the existing budgeted establishment as part of the second tranche of the government's commitment to increase police officer numbers nationally by 20,000. That the PCC has undertaken a broad range of consultation over the course of the last year to determine the public support for a precept increase, and that the overall collective outcome of the consultation shows that there is a majority support for a precept increase. Following the information presented to the panel today, I will ask Michael Coombs, our member, if he can outline any areas that he wishes to suggest that the Finance Working Group will be monitoring within their work programme. If he has not already done so, he can do that now in due course. And I'll also ask if there's anything else members would like included in the list that I've given. If I turn first to to Michael Coombs. Mike, does anything want to add at this stage?
As Chair, in one sentence, it's the working group and the plan working group, where appropriate, watching and monitoring to ensure that everything that's been pledged today is followed through and delivered, and to understand that. Just building on that, and it's all the things that are in the report, so I won't go through them. You know, in addition, it's looking at, as we always do, at reserves, and particularly in the context of the transition to a new commissioner. And obviously we're reassured by what we've heard today in that respect. And I suppose just finally, I just have a little frustration that at the end of another budget meeting, some of us are still going away unsure about where we are in relation to officer numbers. And so the working group and the plan working group will have to sort of bear down on that one again. And I'm hoping that the spreadsheet that was circulated before this meeting already exists, in that there are columns to the left-hand side which show the earlier years. And if we'd seen those columns today, that probably would have helped with the debate. If those columns don't exist, then it would be harder to look back at the trend that everybody is so interested in. Okay.
Thank you. I think on that point, through the Commissioner, we'll also ask that the Chief Constable ensures that the panel plan working group is given very clear data, and if there's any queries, that we get that addressed, because I agree with you. I think we need to be clear, and the public want to know, and actually it's all there and available, and it sounds to me like it's all accountable. Let's get it, make sure it's very clear. So thank you for that, Mr. Coombs. John Beavis, I think you're going to want to speak. You're probably our last speaker. I don't know. You're on mute, John.
Sorry, it's an historic one. I've taken it down.
Okay. Fine. On that case, members, can I thank you at this stage for all the contributions, questions, and actually taking this as seriously as you have. It is a very important part of our calendar year. I feel that we've done the role properly, and we can now take a short break of about 10 minutes. Return it. In fact, we'll go to return at 12:30, where we will continue the remaining part of the panel. Thank you.
Chairman, can I just say thank you to everybody for your thoughtfulness and your full support today. It really matters, of course, to me, because I'm presenting to you, but actually I think where it most matters is to the communities, and the comments that you've made and the reservations that you've expressed, but the result you've given are what I might have hoped to see if I was sat in your chair rather than this one. So thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, and well done, panel members. Thank you. We'll take a break and we'll return at 12:30. Good afternoon, everybody who's on the virtual meeting now. We're going to return to the next item on the agenda, which is the Police and Crime Commissioner Police and Crime Plan delivery. And we're going to receive an update against the Police and Crime Plan delivery from James from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. James, if you're there.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members, and members, thank you for your constant and really welcome support from the first part of the meeting. It's very much appreciated, and a personal thank you from me for the recognition that you gave me. We worked very hard to try and support you in this last year, and we'll continue to commit to do that over the coming months as we transition through to a new commissioner and into a new plan. Now, I've got a brief update for you this morning, or this afternoon as it is now, for the delivery plan update. And I hope many of you will have seen the way in which we try and articulate now just how we are looking at different areas of the business and how we're working both on our delivery plan and the business plan. And just to highlight for you some of the key areas of work and progress that's being made within the work that we're doing to support domestic abuse, and I'm sure you'll be aware that one of the 4 justified reasons for leaving your home is to flee domestic abuse. And we've been working very hard with Portsmouth and with Southampton and with other areas to develop new contracts and support people during this time of COVID. And it's also been a real challenge to us, but also a real opportunity to create these processes, looking at how we might be able to further develop partnerships across our area. We've also secured additional funds for specialist domestic abuse support from the Ministry of Justice, and we're at nearly £800,000 in additional funds for commissioned services that we've been able to successfully bid for in this last year. And whilst we draw in funds through many routes, the work of the team to further supplement that has been hugely successful in this last year, with significant additional funds drawn in to support victims of crime. We're also targeting key communications to make sure that those people who are being victims of crime are able to understand and aware of such things as Annie, which is the need for assistance, and the 55, which is the number that you dial when you're on a 999 call but you're afraid to speak, so that the call handler knows that you're there and need assistance. And we've been working hard to support those initiatives. Also working in areas of sexual crime and caring for people who've been victims of sexual crime, again with Portsmouth and Southampton, the setting up of an extended contract for the independent sexual violence advisors in Portsmouth, and then a view to, and we've been working quite hard at this into the coming years with new contracts to try and combine services so we can offer consistency of service across all of our policing area. One of the questions that you asked this morning is what preparation is the Commissioner making for the new Commissioner to be able to effectively hand over? And one of the things the Commissioner asked me specifically to do, and we've been working hard as a team, is to allow review opportunities for all of these grants and for all the contracts as the new Commissioner will come into place and support these contracts and have the opportunity to look at the detail of them and to see how then they might fit into a new police and crime plan. We're also in the process of tendering for new SARCs, which is the referral centres for those people that have become victims of sexual crime, and it's to create environments so that they can be looked after and cared for whilst they go through quite some difficult processes as victims of crime. We're also extending other services to do with support for children who've been victims of crime, and again working in Portsmouth is one of the areas that we're focusing there. So a lot of the work in the areas of sexual crime and domestic abuse, the focus on partnership with our top tier authorities, particularly Portsmouth and Southampton, has been an area of considerable work and improvement for us. You'll also be aware that we work very hard with Enzo, who's my deputy, looking at criminal justice, and there's been a lot of work across the criminal justice area, which is the Wessex area for us, through the Criminal Justice Board, that looks at the new obligations of the new Victims Code, that looks at trial readiness and how we're trying to speed up the process by making sure people are ready to go to court when their trials are there, so they're given early notice. Again, we're all aware that there's been this growing backlog from before COVID, but made much worse by COVID, and making sure that we have the right services in place to support victims. We've been extending those services because of the extended time period. Been working closely with the Constabulary to make sure that they're looking after witnesses that are needed for those trials. But also we've adopted the video evidence protocol in our area. And again, thanks to the PCC's team and the work they're doing with the Constabulary and partners. And that should, again, go live in Portsmouth Crown Court next month. Also working with our criminal justice partners to ensure that there is a greater focus on victim support at this time. It's essential also that we work with victims and witnesses to make sure that we minimise the dropout rate. One of the sad statistics that we know, particularly for those people who've been victims of domestic abuse, is that if we don't get them to court quickly, then there's a very real potential that they may drop out of that process and that they won't see justice. So again, significant work and a lot of effort put in at this time to work with criminal justice partners and police to see better outcomes for those people. The OPCC is also driving for improvements across the criminal, the Crown Prosecution Service. There's a real concern regarding rape cases as well, and so working with the Constabulary to make sure that there's effective delivery of an action plan that sees improvement in relation to case file build, disclosure material to the defence, engagement with victims, and provision of support services for victims, regardless of the case resulting in an outcome or not. But it's absolutely essential that we do that. And this next slide, it just unpacks again also the statutory responsibilities that the PCC has, and this is the underlying ongoing business, and something that we've been doing with the plan working group is to make sure that we separate the two areas to show what we're doing to deliver all the aspects set out in the police and crime plan, but also that we unpack very much the significant amount of work that goes on the day-to-day business of just taking care of our communities, keeping our communities safer, and we're covering off still a number of those areas as we run through to the elections and into a new term of a police and crime commissioner. I also wanted to highlight for you this morning, this afternoon, the work of the Violence Reduction Unit, as well as the Safer Streets project that's going on in Southampton. And the two very much work in tandem. Violence reduction works with offenders, and we were fortunate enough to be awarded a further 50,000 to our violence reduction units, which is a winter contingency funding to be able to continue to support that through to the end of the year. And it's likely that next year those violence reduction units will be funded again. And so to see the benefit that brings, and it's quite an interesting approach. It takes a public health approach, which I'm not sure you're aware of, but it asks us to treat crime and particularly violent crime like a disease. So we identify the problem, we look at what's causing it, we use a lot of what works, the lessons learned from others, and then we track it and measure it. And the idea is that you isolate it and that then you work from both ends. So you support the offenders, but also you take better care of the community to be able to make sure people are less likely to be victims. And I'm pleased to say that the annual report for last year's work will be going up on our website shortly, and that I hope you'll find helpful to understand the huge benefit that's had. I want to highlight to you the Youth Commission launch of the Basingstoke Peace Project, which saw a piece of artwork created from the destruction of a lot of edged weapons and creating something that would cause people to stop and think. And also just the VRU Offender Project launched the 342 project, which is the number of people who offended with knife crime over the years of 2018-19. And what it does is it again looks at the drivers and the causes behind why young people might be stopped with a knife, or why they'd be considering committing an offence with a knife. And again, the Commissioner's Office is leading on supporting that. I also want to highlight to you today that the Safer Streets project that's going on in Southampton, and you heard the Commissioner say that he is, through the budget setting this year, he sees such a huge benefit of the Safer Streets project happening that he wants to commit to funds being delivered in Basingstoke and in Portsmouth to deliver similar initiatives. Now that's a huge opportunity for us. We've seen a real positive impact of the development of the Safer Streets project, and I'm really proud to say that the team has worked hard with so many different partners, from Southampton City Council and their parks team to the councillors. Particularly thank you to Dave Shields for the strong support that he's given, and to all of the ward councillors who are all delivering huge support and the interface with the communities to make the Safer Streets project a benefit and a reality to the particular wards in Southampton. And there are so many other Go Southampton, St Mary's Church, the SOCO team who are working with the Safer Streets project, and for us it shows real evidence of how working together in partnership can make a difference for your community. And they're quite simple interventions, but CCTV, better lighting, it makes a difference, and certainly a lot of discussion with the university and the young people who are cared for in the university and who study in Southampton have been able to contribute to initiatives that make them feel safer in the places that they live. So members, I also highlight to you just any key decisions that have come through in this last quarter, and you've had in your papers the list of decisions, but it's been a challenging time for policing and for the work of the Police and Crime Commissioner to do with equality and diversity, and we're really pleased with the outcome from the gross misconduct hearings, and that as the Commissioner has said, that there is no place for that sort of behaviour in policing. And the Commissioner's personal response to that was to want to ensure that the Chief Constable was supported with not just internal development and accreditation, but to allow the constabulary to be supported externally, so that we can be confident about the sort of training that's delivered, particularly around equality and inclusion for Hampshire Constabulary. And so it's a whole organisation approach, and it is a considerable investment, but an investment that will give all communities confidence and will improve the culture of policing right through its whole organisation, in all ranks and in all teams at all grades. And it'll be focused specifically on the communities that we have within Hampshire, and we have over 90 different ethnic communities, as well as many different other places in which people meet, and for the constabulary to be able to understand that better and to have the appropriate support, the Commissioner was strongly supportive of, and is choosing to invest in that over the coming year. I think that brings me to the end. I tried to be brief for you today, so I hope that that was of interest for you all.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, James. My equipment's just been playing up a little bit, but I think I've got there now. If I turn to the chair of the Plan Working Group, Simon, did you want to make any comment in response to James's?
I think it might be useful to round up my update with some comments, Dave, to be honest.
Thank you.
Just so that we can sort of inform the rest of the wider panel with some of the conversations that we've been having. James specifically talks about the Pan Hampshire domestic abuse services, and one of the things that we keep discussing, as always, will be that sort of contrast between centralised services and local services, making sure we get the advantages of both of those, because I know that can be a point of concern for some local authorities and some councillors. Obviously, we've also had a continuing conversation about the role of community safety partnerships in the commissioning process. That relationship seems to be improving a lot, but there still seems to be a couple of patchy areas that we just need to get to the bottom of, as far as why is that? Is that something within the local authority, or is that something within the OPCC? And hopefully we can work through that. Obviously, we've also had lots of conversations about the impact of COVID and the pandemic, whether that's services like the integrated offender management going online and what issues that creates, or with the backlog of court cases, as James describes, the results that has really on which officers that might increase workloads, as far as how many cases they're really holding on to, and what that means for victims, what that means for offenders, but also what that means for the staff in those systems. We've also been looking at, obviously, we've talked a lot today about violence reduction units, but so that we can, as members, really understand the models that the office are often talking to, so that we understand what the models are in their purest forms, but what in Hampshire the constabulary and the office are sort of taking from them that can be implemented for us, and really sort of understanding the impact positively that the pandemic can have. It's been noted by us that the public participation in Compass meetings seems to have increased significantly, so much so that the last Compass meeting that the Commissioner undertook with the Chief Constable was 100% focused on dealing with members of the public's questions directly. So sort of really, that's probably a bit of a pendulum swing for us, that perhaps it should go back to the middle bit that says, you know what, it isn't all about members of the public. Some of that's also about very specifically with the responsibilities of the Commissioner dealing with his points of scrutiny. So that's just some headlines of our conversations that we've been having recently.
Thank you, Simon. And it draws to mind, subject to ultimately elections and things, I think the Police and Crime Working Group could consider preparing a briefing for the new Commissioner with some of these key points that you're referring to in due course, so that the handover of a direction is there. So, I mean, it's very good what you're doing, and I think we can put that into our plan as well. I can see James.
And probably one of the keys that we've started raising, even just thinking about the plans for 2022, obviously we've got lots of panel members like myself who chair community safety partnerships, and of course community safety partnerships pick up a statutory responsibility for serious violence in 2022. So some of those things to sort of make sure we're starting to do that work.
Yeah, and I think this is where our expanding role will be. The other one I'm just minded on at the moment, keeping my eye on from the panel perspective, is the newly formed the new formed Fire Authority, Hampshire Null and White Fire Authority, and making sure as a panel we're just linked into that. I know we're not directly responsible and the Commissioner hasn't taken direct responsibility, but there is a platform that's moving there. Simon, thank you very much for that. I know that Councillor Dave Shields, sorry, I should just deal with the recommendation. The recommendation here is the panel notes the update which is provided by the Police and Crime Plan. If members are happy, I'll just take a verbal yes. If you can just unmute, and I'm seeing lots of nods.
Agreed.
Yes, agreed.
Thank
you.
Yes.
Moving on to item 9.
Yes.
I think, Simon, thank you for that. Is Councillor Dave Shields on, or has he gone now? I think he has gone.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Good. Dave, would you mind just giving us a brief update on the Equality and Diversity Group, if that's all right?
Thank you, Chair. So we had a meeting just over a week ago, an inaugural meeting of the Equality Working Group. And in addition to myself, who was elected as Chair representing Southampton City Council, I'm supported here by Narinda Baines, Councillor Narinda Baines from Havant, Councillor Jan Warwick from New Forest, Bob Perkins, Independent, and Simon Bound from Basingstoke. We touched on 5 points, and you've already alluded to the situation in the Basingstoke PIC, and thank you very much for that statement. That's clearly a clear priority for us. But we also looked at monitoring and practice. We looked at hate crime. We looked at stop and search. So these are some important issues that we want to get into. And so I look forward to chairing that and being able to report back progress on the work of this working group at future meetings.
Yeah, it's particularly important in March, David, obviously because the next meeting after that will be into a job. That doesn't mean that group won't remain, but I don't know.
I might not.
It will may or may not, but I think it was more about making sure we had a March update. And I'm grateful to you as chair of that group, taking on the additional focus on the matter you just discussed with the Chief Constable and the PIC. And I think looking at it, the Chief Constable welcomed that as well. So another very positive piece of work. So we don't need to vote or even nod on that. Thank you for the update. Item 11 on pages 136 to 139, we have a future work plan laid out by Caroline for our information. Unless there are any questions from members, I'm just going to suggest at this stage that the work plan is agreed. Are members happy with that? You can just verbally say yes. Any issues or concerns with that? Don't want anybody not to feel.
Chairman, it's only just to say that it's not me on the diversity working group. It's Councillor Diane Andrews from the New Forest. I mean, I'm sure just to correct that for the minutes. Thank you.
It was a slip of the tongue. Such lovely ladies.
Understandable mistake.
Equally high quality by the sound of it, so that's good. Excellent. Well, we've agreed our work plan. We've covered the other aspects, and although we're slightly ahead of our planned closure time, unless any members have any other issues, our next meeting, I remind everybody, is scheduled for the 12th of March, and that will be our last scheduled meeting for this municipal year. And I will therefore, can't see any other hands, check with Caroline. Is there anything else I need to do, Caroline?
No, not today, Chairman. Thank you.
Well, there's one more thing, which is to thank you on behalf of the panel, Caroline, for the professional work you do, not just on these meetings, but I know behind the scenes as well. And there's a lot of nods on that. So thank you very much. And I'll, at 12:55 by my watch, which is Isle of Wight time, so it might be slightly behind the rest of England, I will now close the meeting.